just to introduce Dave Carey this afternoon, who's going to be talking about some of the amazing lobbying work that's happening on farmers' behalf in Ottawa. So Dave is Vice President of Government and Industry Relations with the Canadian Canola Growers Association. So this is the national farmer-driven organization that we also partner with as the provincial canola growers organization. He leads the organization's advocacy efforts. He spends his days engaging directly with federal policymakers, their staff, and industry partners. So if you are interested in policy, affected by policy, everybody's affected by policy, but if you want to know who's helping us with that, here's your person. So Dave is also Vice Chair of the Board of Directors of the Canadian Agri-Food Trade Alliance, and that represents 90% of all agricultural and food exports. And in 2021, Dave founded and now co-chairs the Agriculture Carbon Alliance. So this might be something that's come across your social media feed, your news source. It's the first of its kind coalition of 16 national farm groups focused on agri-environmental policy issues. And Dave was the architect of Bill C-234, which is seeking to exempt on-farm use of natural gas and propane from the carbon tax. So obvious, important bottom line impacts on that bill. So, and a little background about Dave. Prior to joining CCGA, he spent 8 years with the Canadian Sea Trade Association as well. 3 years as the executive director, so he's very familiar with Parliament Hill, also as a senior political staffer for members of Parliament from Ontario and Alberta. And he's been recognized by his peers for his excellence in government relations and has been included as one of the top 100 lobbyists in Canada in 2021, 22, and 23. So you can see why I could not shorten that, because it would do a disservice to the kind of expertise that we have available to us to support farmers on policy. So would you help me welcome Dave Carey?
Good morning, everyone. I recognize that I'm kind of the presentation before lunch, but thanks for sticking around. And looking forward to sort of unpacking a little bit about Ottawa today. So the next 40 minutes or so, I'll plan to provide my perspective and insights on lobbying in Ottawa, the role of farm groups, my perspective on kind of agriculture advocacy. As a professional lobbyist since who leaving politics has worked exclusively in agriculture advocacy. I'll help here with the slide. There we go. So this is what I was doing before coming to the agriculture sector. That's Stephen Harper and his wife Laureen Harper. That's May 2010. So again, since leaving politics, I've worked exclusively in agriculture, and that's by choice. I'm not actually from a farm. So thanks to Manitoba Canola Growers for the invitation to be here today. I am based in Ottawa, so it was quite a journey to get here yesterday through the highway and Air Canada. I'm based 1 block south of Parliament Hill in what we call Grains HQ. So today I'm going to cover sort of 4 main topics when it comes to lobbying. So lobbying 101, what is a lobbyist? What are we trying to do? Kind of Ottawa State of the Union. The lobbying strategy and tactics that we use, and then just some food for thought and takeaways. So what is a lobbyist and what is it exactly that we do? There's a few different kinds. We have 3 streams, basically. There's consultant lobbyists. They represent different clients, much like a lawyer would. They're on retainer, hired guns. They're in for one group one day, another group the next day. There's the pundits and talking heads you see on CTV, CBC, whatever your kind of news preference is. They provide commentary on state of play, often kind of build themselves as, I'm a conservative strategist, I'm a liberal strategist. These folks don't typically actually do a lot of lobbying, and a lot of them have never worked on a campaign. I have run national and provincial campaigns, and a lot of these consultant lobbyists, talking head pundits really haven't. And then the third is in-house, which is what I do. day in and day out represent kind of canola farmers, your interests, but that's sort of what we do. So what are we trying to do? We're trying to navigate this web of machinations that go into political policy making at the federal level. It's complicated, it's convoluted, but I'd also point out that this is how Ottawa should work in a majority government, pre-social media, pre-COVID, pre-virtual lobbying, pre-social media and the 24-hour news cycle. These are sort of all the factors that influence Parliament Hill, and the decisions that Ottawa makes impact your farms, for good or bad. So our job is to try to navigate this web, push good ideas through, and stop good ideas from seeing the light of day. So I spend most of my time meeting with members of parliament, senators, ministers, and their staff. That's how my day is typically filled. In those meetings, there's different kinds of meetings, just like you would have in the business world. There's introductory meetings, there's meetings about relationship building, and there's meetings where you're meeting on either high-level issues or on very specific policy priorities. As you can imagine, like in your businesses, it's much easier to have a difficult conversation or to ask a favor of someone from whom you have a pre-existing relationship. The difference between getting a cold call, an email out of the blue, expecting you to do something for them, versus someone reaching out that's a friend of a friend. Maybe they played on your hockey team. Maybe you went to high school with them. You're much more likely to return a call, to do a favor, to listen to someone's complaints or concerns if there is a pre-existing relationship. Parliamentarians are busy people, like all of us. It's hard to build a relationship when you're in a crisis. The time to buy insurance is not after the fire has happened. Building relationships pays dividends, because when you do have an issue, you're not walking in the door, you have 30 minutes max, you're not trying to explain who you are and why you matter, you're getting right down to it. Having a strong Rolodex will ultimately pay dividends for sure. I also spend a lot of time working with other association staff. There's a lot of groups in agriculture. I didn't write it up this way. There's a lot of groups in Ottawa. If I have a great idea and I want to pitch a member of parliament on it, the two first questions you're going to ask, what does everyone else think? If this is such a good idea, how come you're the only one telling me about it? So a lot of it is about trying to present a unified front. So what do we do day to day? We participate in studies. I think in 2023, we responded to 25 formal consultations from the federal government. We appear at standing committees. In 2023, I testified at 7 House of Commons and Senate standing committees on everything from Bill C-234, which I'll talk about a bit, to rail and extended interswitching, to trade, to the conflict in Ukraine and its impact on global food. And as Sean Haney from Real Ag often points out, there is the lunches, there is the reception circuits, there is the scotches, there is the golf. So what are we trying to do? We are trying to advance policy issues with the ultimate goal of creating a legislative and regulatory environment that gives farmers freedom to operate, to let farmers do what you do best, which is farm. We do that by trying to reduce red tape, informing policy and program delivery, supporting good ideas and trying to end bad ideas, being a reliable source for credible information. There's so much misinformation out there about modern agriculture. There's so many groups pushing information that's not true, and we want to be the reliable source. We don't want them going to environmental defense or the David Suzuki Foundation when they have questions about agriculture. They're happy to speak about agriculture. We want members of parliament to come to us. We have to build trust. We have to be at every table, and I'll speak about that in a bit. And then a lot of it is risk management. A lot of it is the absence of a loss, in some cases a win, particularly with this government. And we are active on social media. A lot of the work you cannot put on social media. I'll be pretty candid over my course of the talk today. But if I said everything that I do in a day-to-day or kind of how everything gets made, it would ruin my relationships that I've established in Ottawa over the last 15 years. So Ottawa's State of the Union. It's kind of U.S. jargon, but I like it. It's sort of the kind of current state of play in Ottawa. We've had more than 8 years of a Liberal government, half of that a minority. It's safe to say that the current federal government has lost the plot, and the polls are reflecting that. Conservatives aren't going to win the next election, the Liberals are going to lose it. Governments lose elections, parties, or the outcome that a party receives is you get to form government, but governments defeat themselves. When the House of Commons returns at the end of this month, it'll be interesting to see if there has been any tone change. Members of Parliament have been home since before Christmas in your ridings, like here in Brandon and across the country, hearing from constituents. And my bet from previously working for members of Parliament would be their constituents aren't talking about ideology. They're not talking about environmental policy or electric vehicles, but rather they're talking about affordability, cost of living, inflation, interest rates, grocery store prices, carbon tax, and mortgage and rental prices. So what will the Liberals do? Well, they'll either double down and show no willingness, or they will break. This is not a middle-of-the-road government. I don't think they're going to acquiesce. It's either they're going to reverse their policy positions, or if Minister Guilbeault gets his way, they're going to double down. So some observations. So since 2021, we've had what's called a supply and confidence agreement between the Liberals and the NDP. That essentially means that the NDP vote with the Liberals on any matter of confidence. A matter of confidence is any issue related to financial, the budget, but also the government can decide an issue as a confidence motion. If a government loses any vote that is considered a confidence motion, Parliament is dissolved and it triggers a general election. So the NDP, since 2021, have voted with the Liberals every single time on a matter of confidence. You cannot call an election. Election can't be triggered unless a confidence vote is triggered or the Prime Minister goes to the Governor General. The NDP can end this agreement at any time. This is not, ironclad agreement. This is a back and napkin thing. And really, we are in kind of house of cards right now. The Conservatives are surging in the polls. Public support is strong. That is difficult to maintain. Pierre Poilievre still has a bit of a honeymoon sheen on. They're already making some mistakes. Their position against the Canada-Ukraine Free Trade Agreement is costing them. There's a huge Ukraine diaspora across the prairies. It makes literally no sense. The issues the Conservatives are talking about, the environmental provisions in the Canada-Ukraine Modernized FTA, the same language we have in every free trade agreement, including the 3 that I worked on under the Harper government. This is almost the same language. Again, so the Conservatives aren't infallible. Pierre Poilievre, right? He's a career politician. He is a huge shadow cabinet. Typically, when the longer politicians are in politics, the bigger their circle has to be, because you have to reward your old friends, keep the faithful, you got to bring in new allies, and you've got to sort of mollify your leadership contestants. So Pierre Poilievre is the largest shadow cabinet in the history of Canada. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau is the largest cabinet in the history of Canada, but the second largest was Harper, and the third largest is Brian Mulroney. So when you see all these ministers, it's not a Liberal thing. It's that the longer you're a politician, the bigger that inner circle becomes, because you've got to keep everyone at the table. So the current government. There's certainly a lack of focus on economic and monetary policy. I think that's clear. It's very ideologically driven. This is not a centrist government, and this is not a partisan thing. This is, this poli-sci class could teach this. A lot of the current cabinet ministers are not Liberals. They're not Jean Chrétien, they're not Paul Martin Liberals. What we've seen happen in Canada is that the path to power is through the Liberals or the Conservatives. So you have, I'd say, a good third of the current Liberal cabinet are not Liberals. They run as Liberals because they want a path to power. They want to be in government. They want to become a member of Parliament. And the goal of most MPs is to become a minister. If you run for the Green Party, or as an independent, or the Marxist Party, certainly there's one that would probably run for that if they had a shot at getting in. If you want to form government, it's Liberals or Conservatives federally. So we don't have business Liberals sitting around that cabinet table. Minister Guilbeault is the founder of Greenpeace Quebec. He'd run for the Green Party, but he would never be a member of Parliament. Elizabeth May doesn't even get a seat at committees. I testified at 7 of those committees this year. She doesn't even get to do that. So business Liberals are in short supply. There's about 20 of them, I'd say, and there's over 100 Liberal members of Parliament. They actually have an informal caucus, the business Liberals. There's like 25 of them. 20 of them are probably true business Liberals. We've also had the rise of Environment and Climate Change Canada, or ECCC for short. In 2020, they announced Healthy Environment, Healthy Economy Plan. So the acronym for that is HEHE, ironically. That's where they indicated the price on carbon is going up to $170 a ton by 2030. That's a game changer for all of us, particularly for farmers. ECCC is now a central agency in Canada. It's a Finance Canada, Treasury Board, Health Canada, Justice Canada, ECCC. That's the amount of power that has been given to that organization. Agriculture was clearly in their sights. This was December 2020, the HEHE came out, right before Christmas. I remember taking the call on my drive home. Agriculture was clearly in their sights. Agriculture accounts for about 10% of emissions. ECCC has agriculture and farming in their sights, but they don't view agriculture farmers as their stakeholders. They just don't. So we all had to beef up our ability to engage with a department who literally views flora and fauna as their stakeholders. Or ENGOs like Environmental Defense, Eco-Justice, the Suzuki Foundations of the world. And this led to the creation of the Agriculture Carbon Alliance, which I will touch on a little bit later. There's also a hell of a lot of uncertainty in the Senate. So back in 2014, when Trudeau was the leader of the opposition party, he thought the best thing for democracy was to kick every Liberal senator out of caucus so they could sit independently, make it less partisanship, less political. All that it has really done is created fragmentation, and senators have never been more out of touch. Every Wednesday, up until 2014, all the Liberal senators sat with all the Liberal MPs, all the Conservative senators sat with all the Conservative MPs, and they heard from MPs about what their constituents, what you and I, the issues that they're hearing, affordability, crime, whatever it might be. They had a touch point with the common people. Now we have in the Senate, and if you try to explain this to my friends who work in Washington, D.C., they literally cannot understand. We have the Canadian Senators Group, the Independent Senators Group, the Progressive Senators Group, the Conservatives, there's 15 Conservatives still, and you have non-affiliated senators. So the fragmentation has led to wild uncertainty in the Senate, and that's had a huge impact on our carbon bill. So election speculation, the supply and confidence agreement goes to 2025. There's a good chance we could go to the polls this year, though. The budget would be a chance to the NDP to decide that they want to go to the polls. There's been enough blood in the water, and they see the polls. If they went to the polls today, the Conservatives are projected to have a massive majority. But a 35-day election, having worked on many of them, is a lifetime, and a lot can change. So a minority government, what does that mean? It just means there's not enough votes for the Liberals to pass anything. They have to do coalition building. Typically, the Liberals work with the NDP, and the Conservatives work with the Bloc Québécois. Just typically how minority governments work. I started my career working in the Harper minority government for the Conservatives. This does give more tools to us as lobbyists. There's private members' bills, there's order paper questions, committee appearances. We're trying to convince the Senate committee to look at a study right now. But it also creates a lot of uncertainty. Election speculation, legislative bandwidth, it's hard to get things done. And there's more MPs that we need to deal with, more members of parliament. Majority government, you really just talk to the government in power. Minority government, I have to talk to the Bloc, the NDP, the Green Party, the Independents, the Conservatives on any real issue. So it's easy to be cynical about politics, particularly from where we are sitting today in Brandon, Manitoba. Whenever there's a really complicated issue, I find the best thing to do is distill it down to why. So that's the current House of Commons in West Block. That's not where the House of Commons was when I was a political staffer. It was in Centre Block. But it comes down to population. And I often get asked, why do we see Ottawa making decisions that are so out of touch or bad for the prairies? And it's not some Machiavellian plot against the prairies. Unfortunately, it's population. Population is key. MPs, members of parliament, are only supposed to have 100,000 constituents. So there's 338 seats currently in the House of Commons. Alberta has 34, Manitoba has 14, Saskatchewan has 14. So the prairies has 72 of 338 seats. So again, when you're looking at why are people so focused on Ontario? Why are people so focused on Quebec? Well, between Ontario and Quebec, they have 60% of the seats. 198 of 338 seats are from that. Maritimes has a lot of seats. BC's got quite a few. But Ontario and Quebec have 60% of those people in that House of Commons are from Ontario and Quebec. So when I go to the Senate National Finance Committee, and I'm talking about why we think extended interswitching is a good idea, there's not one senator on that committee from the prairies. There's actually the only one from west of Ontario is from Yukon. So again, it's not Machiavellian. It comes down to population. This is what impacts decision making. It impacts why the priorities are where they are. So, COVID. When COVID hit, lobbying skyrocketed because some industries weren't represented, but mostly because the ease of advocacy, a whole new world of virtual lobbying. Before, your organization had to invest. You had to have a footprint in Ottawa. You had to fly on your board once a year to lobby in Ottawa. Now, Zoom and Teams, all of a sudden, everyone with a $20 a month Zoom account could be a lobbyist. The ease of access to Ottawa because of virtual lobbying, you could say it's good for democracy, but really what it's done is create a lot of disparate voices and a lot of people with opinions that haven't gone through a board of directors like we have. We have a 10-member farmer board that makes sure that our policy priorities line up with their farmers. When Manitoba Canola appoints to our board, those farmers represent Manitoba's interests. MPs have never been pulled in more directions. It's legitimately hard for members of parliament to make good decisions these days. On any given issue, they could hear from thousands of people about thousands of different perspectives. So this image is from the 2022 Lobbying Commissioner Report. 2022 broke lobbying records, 31,000 registered lobbying meetings in 2022, 31,000 times members of parliament, ministers, or senators were lobbied in 2022. There's now somewhere between close to 8,000 federal registered lobbyists, and there's almost 4,000 registered lobbyist organizations. So when you talk about cutting through the noise, this is part of why it's so difficult. A lot of these registrants, both lobbyists and lobby organizations, did not exist before the pandemic, but have stuck around since, because members of parliament are still willing to meet by Zoom and by Teams. So we don't have the 2023 numbers, these are the 2022 numbers. So in 2022, the Canadian Canola Growers, my organization, we were the top lobbyist organization in Canada, regardless of sector, regardless of industry, regardless of big company, et cetera. We had 240 registered meetings with designated public office holders in 2022. So that would be a vice president or up at an agency like Canadian Food Inspection Agency, an assistant deputy minister up at Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada, a member of parliament, a senator or minister, and some political staff. So we were the most active lobbyist organization in Canada, but we were only 240. So less than, not even close to 1%, and we were the most active. So it shows you how many voices are speaking to politicians. And if you look down that list, there's organizations there that have a very different view of farming and agriculture than those here do today. So, different governments have different views of lobbying. The Harper government was fine with dealing with people like me in-house. I'm there day in and day out. I'm not going to be there for Pepsi one day and Red Bull, and then Philip Morris the next day. The Liberal government under Prime Minister Trudeau is very open to consultant lobbyists. I have a lot of friends. Now that I got you on the phone, can I also book a meeting for Red Bull? Can I book a meeting for et cetera, et cetera? So over the 8 years of this government, lobbying has gone up by 1,348%. It's a staggering statistic when you consider these are the people that pass laws and make decisions that impact your farms. So this is what happens. You got 8,000 lobbyists running around town. CDCJ and our like-minded partners have to be able to cut through that noise, and we do it by coalition building, and I'll speak to some of our tactics in a moment. So, tactics. When it comes to advocacy, you have to be at every table. It's literally, if you're not at the table, you're on the menu. We're not speaking on behalf of farmers. ENGOs, environmental organizations, are speaking on your behalf. It's not just farm groups, there's value chain groups like CropLife and Cereals Canada and the other agriculture value chain groups. But if we don't tell our story, someone will tell it for us. So, just a few table setting comments. In this day and age, elbows up doesn't work. It just doesn't. I know being the loudest, the quickest issue a press release to rail against on social media, it makes us feel good. It's cathartic. Often organizations feel they have to do this because they're stakeholders. We want action. And I understand, you want to see that your organizations are representing you. And there's a time and a place for this, but day in and day out, it's about relationships. We need to recognize there's a fundamental power imbalance. I could request to meet with the Minister of Agriculture, and they could just say no. There's really no recourse that we have. It's never happened, but they could just say no. I'm flying back to Ottawa tomorrow because I'm meeting with Chrystia Freeland's Chief of Staff on Thursday morning about carbon tax. But Andrew Bevan could have said no, and I really have no recourse other than we continue to be there, build relationships, and provide pressure. You see on TV every day, Monday to Thursday at 2:15 p.m., 2 to 3, I guess, question period. That's scripted theater. Everyone knows the questions are going to be asked. That's not where work is done. Work is done in meetings, in advocacy meetings and at the committee level. Question period is theater. It is. There's substantive debates that happen during debate. Question period is just what it is. It's question period. It's not answer period. You know, other thing I just want to say is there's good people in every party, and there's not so great people in every party. There's a few excellent Liberal members of Parliament that are advocates for agriculture. Francis Drouin and Cody Bloys come to mind. We probably have the best NDP agriculture critic that we've ever had in Alistair McGregor, and probably the most level, even-keeled, and willing to listen to issues outside of Quebec with Yves Perron, the Bloc's agriculture critic. And I know I kind of ripped on the Senate a bit. There's some really good senators. Senator Rob Black from Ontario, Senator Colin Deacon from the Maritimes. Obviously, you have Senator Plett from Manitoba. We've got good senators too. And I would say that the House of Commons Standing Committee on Agriculture and Agri-Food is likely the highest functioning, least partisan, most collaborative, and most constructive of any parliamentary committee in the House or the Senate. They really do take off their partisan hats. It's fitting because we're sitting in a hockey arena, but most members of Parliament get along quite well, and they leave it on the ice. It's just something to consider when we're talking about, you see people yelling at each other in question period, they will often, have a coffee or have a beer after. So how do we do it? It used to be the 5 Ps of lobbying, but I added the 6th one recently. This is just my views of it. It's worth what you paid. The first is persistence. We have to be there day in and day out telling our story, or someone else will tell it for you. The squeaky wheel does get the oil at times. Lobbying is a career. It makes you inherently repetitive. My wife can attest to that at dinner parties. My wife's a therapist, and I'm a lobbyist, so I try to convince her something, and she tells me what went wrong in my childhood, and then we just kind of continue and go around in circles. I remind her that Freud said the Irish are impervious to psychoanalysis, and we continue, much to the chagrin of our children and our dinner guests. But you really have to hammer your message home. You have to tell the MP what you have to say, remind them what you said, follow up and remind them again of what you've told them. Because they're hearing from 31,000 different people in any given year. Second is policy prioritization, and this is a tough one. Everything is a high priority for you on your file. Everything's a high priority, but we need to find the policies that are high priority and are high urgency. Improving Canada's safety net programs like agri-stability, absolutely a high priority. Our next shot at it is until the next framework in 2028, so it's not urgent. The price on carbon is urgent. Trade deals is urgent. Making sure we have access to crop protection products is urgent. Getting gene editing regulations so farmers get their hands on gene-edited canola or gene-edited soybeans. Those are urgent, and they're a high priority. When you go to a meeting with a member of Parliament, you have 30 minutes from the time you sit down to the time you're out the door. And in that, you have to do intros. They want a photo. There's no photo. Why would the MP take the meeting? So you have to distill it down, and this comes often to our boards. We need to make sure our boards are willing to give clear direction on what are the policy priorities. Partnerships. It's tough to go it alone, as I said earlier. The more we can present a unified front, the better. And not just working with the typical stakeholders, but working with other groups. We've become very active in the Canadian Chamber of Commerce, and they sent a letter in support of our carbon tax exemption bill on farm, because politicians need to hear about why farming matters, not just from farm groups. Political realities. A good quote is, there's no sense arguing with the ocean about the tides. And it's just the truth, right? There's some things with this government, there's no point. There's no point talking to the Minister Macaulay about carbon tax. So what have we done? We convinced the Conservative MP to introduce a private member's bill. Same end, but just recognizing, railing against a government that's run, to give the Liberals this, they ran 3 times on carbon price and they won every single time. Not by big margins, they're still the government. Public opinion. This is one thing we have in our favor. Farmers are considered the most trusted profession, but the more we can tell members of Parliament about how our views line up with their constituents, the better. And the last one, just polite. It's actually one of the most important. It doesn't mean you don't stand up, it doesn't mean you're not firm, it doesn't mean you don't fight the good fight, but it means you disagree without being disagreeable, you focus on bad policy and not bad people, and you speak to members of Parliament the way you'd expect to be spoken to in any of your business deals. Particularly, remember that power imbalance. A member of Parliament could never meet with you again, so I could stand up and yell at Minister Macaulay, our current Ag Minister. The result, he never meets with us again, never hears our perspective again. And then I think we also do embrace good policy ideas wherever they come from. Cody Blois, as I said, Liberal MP from Kings Hants, Nova Scotia, has some really good ideas about agriculture. We have to support that, despite it being a Liberal MP. Conservatives often have bad ideas. You need to call out your own politicians if they have bad ideas as well. So, believe it or not, there is a bit of a business cycle to Ottawa. I'm going to skip over some of this because I want time for 2, 3, 4, and if there are any questions. But there's a lot that goes into it. There is a business cycle to Ottawa. There's times there that are busier. There are kind of standing things that happen every year, pre-budget submissions, etc. So just the final kind of category, sort of food for thought and some takeaways, right? It's easy to be cynical about federal policymaking about Ottawa, and in many cases, rightfully so. There's a lot of things that never saw the light of day that are good things. That's, again, I talked about the risk management. But there's also some opportunities. Some of you might have heard about this bill, Bill C-234, introduced by Ontario MP Ben Lobb. I harassed Ben Lobb continuously until he agreed to introduce this bill. This bill would exempt on-farm carbon tax from natural gas and propane for heating and cooling of livestock barns, greenhouses, irrigation, grain drying, and feed preparation, steam flaking, etc. The parliamentary budget officer says this bill, over its 8-year lifespan, would save farmers $975 million in federal carbon tax. So this has been my priority since it was introduced. And again, the way we got there was not grains and oilseeds going and telling the federal government about the importance of grain drying. It's that I convinced every one of those logos to stand with us, and let's advocate together. If there's no division, if we stay arm in arm, agriculture, what do? Wedge issue after wedge issue. Supply management versus export oriented. You support SM, therefore you have to support this. So this organization still exists. I co-chair it with the head of the Canadian Federation of Agriculture. Very different views. If we talk trade policy, the thing would collapse. We don't. We only talk environmental policy, and this has been the group behind Bill C-234. And keeping dairy farmers at the table with cattle and pork and chicken and us, it's been a challenge. But when we go to a member of parliament and say no national farm organization doesn't support on-farm exemptions from carbon tax, including those who stylize themselves as very environmentally focused, that is powerful. Sure, the National Farmers Union don't support it, but these groups do. And this has been a powerful message that we've been able to send to members of parliament. So where's the result? We got it through the House of Commons. We had every Conservative, every NDP, every Bloc, every Green Party of Canada member support us. It did not get politicized until clause by clause at second reading in the Senate. The bill has been referred back to the House of Commons with proposed amendments to make it just a grain drying bill in only 3 years instead of 8 years in length. That's why Thursday morning I'm meeting with Christopher Freeland's Chief of Staff. We've got a real shot to return this. The House of Commons now gets to decide what they want done with this bill. It's already been through the House of Commons. The House of Commons will be deciding in the coming months, do we send the amended bill, which would be a grain drying bill for 3 years, back to the Senate, or do we send the original bill, which is an 8-year bill, 8 years of carbon exemptions for all uses on farm production, for food production, that would save farmers $975 million. So this bill has taken up, 30% of my time over the last 2 years, because we know it'll save farmers $975 million. So there is opportunities. And the only reason we got there is not because of the Conservatives. Sure, we had their support, and Ben Lobb was our guy, because we convinced the Bloc. How did we get the Bloc? We had supply management. How did we get the NDP? They view inroads in rural Canada, and there was no farm group that was opposed to it. The NDP want to be more attractive to agriculture and farm organizations. We convinced Elizabeth May and the Green Party of Canada to support our bill, only because there was no one telling her that they viewed as legitimate, that they were against it. So again, partnerships, they pay dividends, and these relationships pay dividends, but the only reason we got there is because we all stayed together, we disagreed without being disagreeable, and we focused on good policy. Thank you. So where are we now? So we ran a letter writing campaign. We had 8,000 letters sent in to members of parliament and senators asking why. The narrative now from Minister Guilbeault, our Minister of Environment, is that 97% of on-farm emissions are already exempt from the carbon tax because gasoline and diesel is. So we've been telling the minister, then why are you fighting us over 3% of emissions? It'll cost farmers close to $1 billion over the next 8 years. They tell us it's not an actual issue. We're manifesting this. Farmers don't actually care. So the Agriculture Carbon Alliance on our website, you can just Google Agriculture Carbon Alliance. We're asking farmers from across Canada, just send us your first name, your province, what commodities you produce. Send us your carbon tax receipts. We're rolling it all up. We're going to send it to every member of Parliament. We've got folks like John Barlow, our Shadow Minister for Agriculture from Alberta, helping us with this. We have about 40 receipts so far. We want to demonstrate to members of Parliament and senators the actual cost that carbon tax on farm is having for your operation. So we've had a great reply from Ontario and British Columbia. As of 2 weeks ago, we didn't have one receipt from the prairies. So if carbon tax is hurting your bottom line, consider, you block out the stuff you don't want to show. It's not personal information, but let us know. Because members of Parliament and senators are being told by Minister of Environment, it's not an actual big deal for farmers. This is farm groups, this is busy work for us. And I know that this is important. So just a plug for that. Again, we've got a real shot so that the Senate will accept the bill. They have to. If the Senate defeated the bill, it would be a constitutional crisis. So if we're able to get an unamended Bill C-234 back to the Senate will pass it. They don't have a choice. Otherwise, you're literally dealing Supreme Court of Canada. So please just consider, if you are carbon pricing does impact your farm, please just consider setting in your receipts. So what can you do? I get asked this a lot. It's my last sort of, get informed, stay informed. It's very easy to only read newspaper articles or whatever that support your own opinion. Check out nationalnewswatch.com. It's a news aggregator. It has no political biases. Whatever story is trending in federal politics, it just lists on their website over and over again. It's very easy. You can see if you're getting on a plane from Ottawa, you can tell sitting at the back which MPs are Conservatives or Liberals based on did they take the Globe and Mail or the National Post when it's handed out to them in business class. It's very easy. We all have biases. So please get out of your comfort zone, read some things that maybe are a bit different. You're all business owners. Meet with your member of Parliament and your member of provincial Parliament, your MLA, MNA, depending on where you're from, annually. My father-in-law is a small business owner. He meets with his MP from every place that he has one of his businesses annually. He meets with his member of provincial Parliament annually. I'm on a first-name basis with every elected official from where I live in the south of Ottawa. Please meet with your MP. That's how you inform policy. I see Jack on. It just takes one MP to stand up at caucus, which happens every Wednesday morning, to say, I heard from my constituent, Jack, this is the big issue. You're amazing where you can get wheels or leverage and momentum. Run or support provincial and national boards. Support your preferred candidates, but don't give Conservatives a pass. If your MP votes for something that you think is bad for your farm, let them know. It shouldn't be just the Liberals or NDP that we criticize. And you've got some great MPs from like Larry Maguire, Brandon Leslie is a good friend of mine. You've got great MPs from Manitoba. But if they vote in a way that you don't think isn't what you view as your constituent, you have to let them know. You have to hold them accountable the same way that we're trying to hold the government today accountable. And just get involved in whatever way works best. But I think if anything, it's get informed, stay informed. You can also, if you're interested in what your MP's up to, there's a website called openparliament.ca. And anytime your MP votes for anything, you get an email. Why did my MP vote against this or for this? It's not all golf, scotches, and lunches. There is a bit of that, as I said earlier. That's my office. And just thank you for the time and attention. I know it's easy to be cynical about policymaking, but do something about it if you don't like it, right? Like it's especially where we are in this country, like in this part of the country. It's not so much the Conservatives are likely going to win, but when there's a nomination, make sure you get the best possible candidate wins that nomination. So it's easy to be cynical, but please get involved. Please meet with your member of Parliament. They're professional meeting takers. You guys are meeting with seed dealers, you're meeting with your crop protection folks, you're meeting with agronomists, you're meeting with whomever. Once a year, sit down for coffee with your MP and tell them your perspective. It will pay dividends, I promise. Thank you for having me. I hope you learned a little bit. I'm kicking around for the next day, so please do feel free to stop by if you want to chat politics. CCJ booth just down there. Thanks for having me here today in beautiful Brandon and home of the Wheat Kings. Thank you.